Ladies and gentlemen, for the average user, most of the data breaches that you might encounter is based on what websites you're visiting, based on what browser that you have. We always heard about these third-party companies that collect your information without you knowing that your information has been collected. Our next speaker will be talking about browser security, the missing layer in security strategy. And our speaker is the Middle East and Africa SE Manager at Menlo Security. Put your hand together for Brett Raybould.
Thank you. Good morning all. Salam alaikum. Very excited to be here. And also to be able to spend a few minutes to talk about something which is top of mind for ourselves at Menlo Security, namely browser security. So time has started, so let's get going. Firstly, I think it's you guys that have got the hardest job, to be able to identify and quantify the risk and be able to select the right tools and controls to mitigate that risk, having the right processes and procedures in place in order to be able to remediate and form incident management strategies and triage remediation, etc. IT security is this crazy complex labyrinth these days, so hard to discern between different technologies, vendors, approaches. One thing which we know for sure is that the main two inbound attack vectors are still web and email. After continuous evolutions of controls and technologies, it's a decades-old problem which we still haven't solved. I'm not American. I don't like ice hockey or anything like that, but I do love that quote from Wayne Gretzky. He said, we've got to skate to where the puck is, not where it's been. And that's something which we struggle to get ahead of these threats within web and email security. It's this constant game of cat and mouse. Attackers change their tactics. Vendors like ourselves have to keep reevaluating and bringing out new features to try and plug that gap. And then that cycle begins again. It's kind of crazy, Where else are you spending more but not coming any closer to solving that problem ultimately? The other point to note is that web, email security, we can group that all together in this sort of context. It doesn't add up to equal browser security. They lack the context of what's actually going on in the browser. They lack the intricate knowledge of what's happening when a user is interacting with a web page, with a website. Most are scanning the network. Most are sniffing your wire for indications of compromise. They're all deterministic, detection-based controls, trying to figure out, is something good or is something bad? Is something malicious or is something benign? And obviously having the controls in place to then block the bad stuff and allow the good stuff to freely move between your networks and other. But just by the nature of what they're doing, they have to make this decision. It's only natural that they're not going to make the right decision all the time. They all suffer from false negatives and false positives, missing traffic or misidentifying traffic, which leaves risk and leaves holes into the enterprise. Unfortunately, none of them are foolproof. For us, the key point is the browser remains that attack surface. If web and email are the doors into your organization, the browser is essentially the lock which the attacker has to pick. Google's come out and helped me out with a number of stats, one in the middle of the page. They came out with one, I think in the beginning of the year, saying something like around 98% of attacks emanate from web and email. This one, 80% of attacks are actually targeting the end user's browser. The stat at the bottom of the page, 75% also comes from Google. I do have stats other than from Google to share as well. But, the way we work has changed. Everyone is working hybrid. Everyone's spending a lot of their day, the vast majority of their time, within a web browser. Within a web browser, within web conferencing or applications used to communicate or collaborate between yourselves, colleagues, and customers. And that's only natural that attackers would then target the applications which users are continuously using throughout their day. It's essentially the kind of low-hanging fruit for these attackers to be able to target. Some of the rest of the stats, these are from our cloud. We've got a small population in terms of users, somewhere around 8 to 9 million on our cloud. You can run it as private cloud as well, but we don't have the telemetry from that. But some of the interesting stats that we're seeing, 75% of phishing links, 70% of attacks related to malware, they're coming from locations which have got good reputations. This is a huge low-hanging fruit for attackers. You've all got firewalls, secure web gateways, proxies, that sort of thing. You rely on URL categorization to keep the known bads out. But if an attacker can get their URLs, links, etc., categorized, you're not going to be blocking that. So it increases their chances of success by huge factors. Bottom right, we're seeing around 2 million password-protected files through our platform on a monthly basis. If you can't open the file to be able to scan it, it's incredibly hard. You have to either blanket allow or blanket block. You're going to cause productivity. Maybe you have a secure area that users have to submit these and they get analyzed by security operations centers, that sort of thing. We're seeing an average lag between detection of phishing sites and from when they're unknown to known to be phishing of around 6 days. It fairly ties in. The Mandiant, one of the leading IR companies globally, they release a yearly report called M-Trends. They measure the average median for global dwell time, so the time between intrusion to detection. Last year it was 10 days. It's down from 16 days in 2022. So we're moving in the right direction, but 10 days is a long time for an attacker to exist within your network. It's widely reported. It's not just us, it's not just Google. It's widely reported by some companies that are hugely bigger than Menlo Security and have been around a lot longer as well. Palo Alto, Google Cloud, Picus, HP, OpSWAT, they're all reporting the increasing growing trend of advanced or more evasive attack techniques being used to target your end users and specifically their browsers, whether that's password-protected files, whether that's other methods to circumvent that sort of thing. You'll see a lot of these popping up in a category which we subscribe to. We call it HEAT, or Highly Evasive Adaptive Threats. They're techniques which are pretty simple that attackers are using in a combination to bypass traditional controls and defenses. The controls and defenses that we use, they've been around for decades. We all know them, you all know them, and I can guarantee that the attackers all know them as well. They're humans, they're highly funded, well-resourced individuals with a motivation to either have financial or others, could be nation state. So some of the techniques that we're seeing often and used in combination to call out, starting from the left-hand side, being able to evade legacy secure web gateway content inspection by using dynamic file downloads. Oh, my bad. This is probably the most sophisticated one. It's essentially something called HTML smuggling. There's a ton of information and blogs about it. It's widely used in red teaming or attack simulation. It's widely used in attacks out there as well. I think there's a timer on that one, my bad. But it's essentially being able to hide your malicious payload or file in the actual HTML file itself. So you can break this up into small chunks, you embed it, you obfuscate it, and the whole point is you use some JavaScript, which then pieces that file back together once it gets back to the endpoint. If you're trying to scan it from a secure web gateway, a file, it doesn't look like an object. There's nothing to scan. It's a simple way that's just easily bypassing those network-based controls. The second one is being able to evade malicious link detection on the email path. Instead of sending your phishing links or malware links via email, use WhatsApp, use LinkedIn, use social, use a whole host of different platforms and services that you can send messages. iMessage, the framework for iPhones, is now supported on Windows operating systems. That's a security nightmare. You're now getting SMS messages on your laptop where you can click and they'll open in the very environment that the attackers want them to. The third one, evading categorization and IOC-based threat detection by using ephemeral or compromised malicious websites. So attackers can get their domains registered, sit on them for months, get them categorized to something, and then launch your attack. If you are similar to me and I had to look up ephemeral on Google, it means shortly lived. So unknown URLs, unclassified. A lot of companies still don't block that. It poses a lot of risk because it's the unknown, but it also poses productivity risks if you are blocking that. The last one before I'll move off this slide, using obfuscation, password protected files, obfuscating your malicious code within the HTML itself. There's functions built into JavaScript to do exactly this. It was built so that JavaScript writers could protect their intellectual property. Now it's used by attackers. All right, next one, thank God. We're seeing the same sort of trend with phishing. So moving from, back in many years ago, you just had to create a domain that looked like Microsoft, but it was misspelled slightly. That sort of simple techniques all the way up to, using now captures, doing this adversary in the middle where you're intercepting requests and proxying it through to, the legitimate websites, but stealing the session cookies along the way. The rise in phishing and the techniques used keeps evolving and keeps making it harder and harder, for technology and technology combined with education to be able to actually combat this sort of thing. 90% of phishing kits use evasive techniques. This was by Palo Alto. It's quite small on the screen. But these sort of things, phishing kits, ransomware as a service, all these sort of commercially available kits that are lowering the entry barrier in terms of skills for would-be attackers. An interesting attack, which we've been covering, it's widely covered within the security community. There's a ton of information and blogs about it. It's called SockGolish. It's a malware delivery system that utilizes a number of these different techniques to provide their malware to would-be endpoints. So the way that it kind of plays out, it firstly is serving its malicious payloads from iframes within well-categorized websites. So typically compromising a website or serving it from a content distribution platform which is categorized. So if you have something categorized as business and economy, it's straight through your web gateway. If you're then utilizing another control like the HTML smuggling, which is what we were covering a second ago, where you're actually embedding that in there, that creates a blind spot for all of those network detection-based controls and allows us to get through. SockGolish was widely used to distribute ransomware. It was used by threat actors, crimeware actors, as well as nation states. We've seen it dropping banking trojans like Dridex that cause remote access entry points, as well as a host of other things, including ransomware. One of the things which compounds this problem is the way that the browser has evolved. It used to be, how do we protect the operating system? All of the applications were sitting on your operating system, but that's all changed. Your browser is now pretty much the new operating system. You can do all of your functions, all of your daily tasks. My browser runs all of the files that I need to download. I can open up PDFs, Word files, Office files, all that sort of stuff. I'm connecting to email, SaaS applications, all that sort of thing within a browser. The browser is now such a complex application. There's thousands and thousands of features and lines of code that make up these browsers. Chromium is by far and away the most used browser or browser rendering engine. It's used in Edge, it's used in Chrome. It's even used in all these new enterprise browsers which are sitting on your network, but all of them are vulnerable to vulnerabilities that target Chrome. If I get a new laptop at work, I've got to get antivirus. I get profiles pushed down to me for encryption, for backup, for all of the security functions to lock it if I'm not active within 5 minutes. All of these password controls and all that sort of thing. We don't have the same thing for browsers. It's an enterprise asset these days, and really our opinion is it needs to be treated as such. There was over 175 vulnerabilities for Chrome last year alone. Those are high and critical vulnerabilities, things that can be exploited by attackers. But we don't have the same controls within browsers. We're typically relying on these detection-based systems to control, malicious code or content from reaching your endpoint and executing in there. So, how could you defend? This isn't a product pitch, so I will leave off all the intricacies of how we do it, but an approach is really to separate the browser from the endpoint. The way that we generally hit the internet, you connect, you'll download the code and content, you're executing it in the browser itself. That's the environment the attackers want you to be executing that code and content. So an approach which is widely used is to move what we see as those risky phases away from the browser, fetching the content, relying on those detection-based tools which we know aren't accurate, and then executing it in the browser. It really doesn't make sense. If you can provide the same user experience, you can do it at scale, you can do it without impacting users and productivity, it just makes much more sense to run that browser remotely. There's a whole host of different ways you can do it, from VDI, the old approach, to running surrogate browsers in containers and things like that, which is more what we're akin to, sort of thing. But it just creates that logical air gap or bulletproof glass in front of the user and the internet. If you're looking to evaluate this type of technology, 3 key pillars or areas which we think are important. One is being able to integrate with your local browsers, to be able to posture assess them, harden them, make sure that they comply with your corporate regulations and guidelines. Make sure that those local browsers are as secure as possible. But essentially, you want to be using the main browser, the heavy lifting, away from that endpoint, in a container which is destroyed after the end of the session and rebuilt. This provides that logical air gap and separation from the internet. No active content should reach your user, and as a result of that, there's no chance for them to be infected. The third thing is to provide secure access to your applications and data using your secure browser. So I say secure cloud, but this could be private cloud as well. So running in your networks and virtual appliances, all that sort of thing. But being able to flip that around to provide secure access to those internal applications, for your users, for contractors, for BYOD devices, so that your applications are protected in the same way as your users are whilst they're browsing the internet. I'll leave you with a few key takeaways. I think I'm almost on time. But evasive threats are targeting the browser continue to evolve. They're growing in sophistication. We're seeing this across web. We're seeing this across email. None of this is slowing down. It's all just increasing. And the attackers are making hay while the sun shines at the moment. The existing set or trinity of web, email, and endpoint security, largely detection-based. They're largely having to make that distinct decision, whether something's good or bad. And as a result of that, it leaves gaps. It leaves the ability to make incorrect decisions. That didn't build correctly. I'll build that out. AI, we use it. I'm sure most other technologies use it these days as well. It's a great tool. You can use it. We use it for providing sort of computer vision for what's actually going on within these browsers at any given point to give us more of an indication whether something could be phishing, something could be malicious, all that sort of thing. And the last one, the evasive threats and the techniques that these attackers are using, it requires a bit more than what we're using currently. It requires more of a prevention-based approach rather than detection. So with that, thank you guys very much for your time, for your attention. I hope you have a great rest of your day. We are, of course, exhibiting. We're on the Cybernight stand just over there. We'd love to talk to you all if you have time. Thank you very much.